press release announcing FDA's accelerated approval of TARPEYO, which was known as Nefecon during its development. But please note that certain information discussed on the call today is covered under the Safe Harbor provision of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act. During this call, management may be making forward. With me on today's call is Calliditas Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Richard Philipson, President of North America, Andrew Udell, and our Chief Financial Officer, Frederick Johansson. So if we can turn to the next page, please. Let me first give you a brief overview of Calliditas, which is now a commercial biopharma company with a strong pipeline. Our strategy is to continue building an orphan and nephrology-oriented company with a strong commercial presence in the U.S. TARPEYO is as you can see, our first commercial product, and it's the first ever drug candidate to be granted an accelerated approval based on the surrogate marker of proteinuria, and to our knowledge, the first ever accelerated approval granted by this particular division of the FDA. So TARPEYO, delayed release capsules, was approved under an accelerated approval to reduce proteinuria in adults with IgA nephropathy at risk of rapid disease progression, generally urine protein to creatinine ratio UPCR at 1.5 gram per gram. We believe that TARPEYO has the potential to become a new standard of care in the treatment of IgA nephropathy, and our goal is to present long-term data supporting disease modification upon completion of our Part B of the NefIgArd trial, which, as you're aware, is expected in early 2023. The company is public both in Europe and in the US, and we have a strong cash position with a cash balance of about 1.2 million Swedish crowns as reported in our last quarterly report. So with that, if we turn to the next page. So as you know, yesterday we received the fantastic news that the US FDA has approved TARPEYO under the accelerated approval pathway for the reduction of proteinuria in adult patients with primary IgA nephropathy. So this approval represents a significant milestone for Calliditas, the IgAN community of patients, caregivers, families, all affected by this progressive kidney disease. And up front, I'd really like to take a moment to express my personal thank you to the patients who have participated and still are participating in our global clinical trial, as well as the clinical investigators and their staff who worked alongside us and our CRO in advancing TARPEYO to this FDA approval. I would also like to thank and recognize the entire Calliditas team for their tireless efforts, persistence, and dedication to this pioneering development program over the last decade. Today truly is a special day for all of us. And this pioneering journey did start quite some time ago, really by two Swedish physicians, Dr. Fellström and Dr. Hellgren, based in Uppsala, who decided to try to develop the first ever approach to target the origin of this disease, which really is found in the gut rather than focusing on the kidney itself. This invention and patent estate was acquired by the company, which then started the clinical development and regulatory journey. It was started by an initial phase 2A study in 2008, which confirmed the approach, and then followed by the very first phase 2B study sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, a large study in 150 patients. Which was published in The Lancet in 2017. And in parallel, the company has worked on a pioneering effort to also try and pave the way on the regulatory side, which resulted and was supported by a publication of a meta-analysis of clinical interventions in IgA nephropathy in the American Kidney Journal in 2016. This meta-analysis has become a component of the FDA's accelerated approval decision-making process. And we are very proud of having been in a position to, in a small way, contribute to that. And last year, the company read out positive top-line data from our Part A of a global phase 3 study, which positioned us to really hopefully have the first ever approved treatment for IgA nephropathy. And this is where today we sit with the final decision of having achieved an ability to bring this to patients. It's been a long, but it's been an amazing journey, and I want to thank everybody who's contributed to making this possible, including the FDA. So if we turn to the next page, so what did the disease landscape look like, which really was the driver behind this effort? So as you know, IgA nephropathy is an orphan disease, and there's a genetic predisposition that's required, but it's not sufficient. Mainly patients are typically diagnosed between 20s and 30s, and we do know that 50% up to 50% are at risk of developing end-stage renal disease within a 10 to 20-year period. And obviously at that stage, the only available result of that today is kidney transplant or dialysis. And despite IgA having been known for quite a while, there's still limited published clinical data as well as information about prevalence and how patients are distributed across various disease states. We did conduct a prevalence study in Europe fairly early on that resulted in about 4 in 10,000, and we estimate prevalence in the US to be about around 130 to 150,000. It is well known, obviously, that higher levels of proteinuria in this disease correlates with a more rapid progression and presents a worse outcome for those IgA nephropathy patients. And we believe, obviously, this is consistent with the FDA's approach with regards to an accelerated approval to really grant us this approval on the basis that TARPEYO really is shown to be able to address this population that has a high unmet medical need. We're extremely excited about really having the first ever approved drug candidate in this particular disease, and we're very excited about the opportunity to bring it to patients. And we obviously also look forward to the data that we will be able to get from completing our study. I also just want to remind everybody about the fact that obviously we are still in a regulatory review with the EMA, and we would expect on the basis of the ongoing discussions to have a target of having an opinion in Q1 of 2022 from EMA. So with this kind of background information, I would like to hand over to Richard to take you through the pathophysiology and the phase 3 trial design.
Thank you, Renee. I'm Richard Phillipson, the Chief Medical Officer of Calliditas, and I'm going to begin by describing the underlying pathophysiology of IgA nephropathy, which is illustrated on slide 7. So according to the predominant theory, the origins of IgA nephropathy lie in the gastrointestinal tract, and more specifically, the distal ileum, where follicles of lymphoid tissue, known as Peyer's patches, are located in high density. This lymphoid tissue produces secretory IgA, which is the first line of defense against gastrointestinal infection. Secretory IgA has a particular property in that it is under-galactosylated in the hinge region of the antibody, which makes it potentially immunogenic. Whilst normally restricted to the gastrointestinal mucosal lining, in IgA nephropathy, the secretory IgA is found in the systemic circulation. Because of its immunogenic properties, when in the systemic circulation, it triggers an autoimmune response, and autoantibodies of IgG and IgA are produced, which bind to the hinge regions of the secretory IgA to produce immune complexes. These immune complexes circulate and are deposited in the mesangium of the glomeruli, the filtration units of the kidney. As a consequence of this deposition, an inflammatory response occurs and the glomeruli become leaky. They leak blood and protein into the urine. Over time, the glomeruli are damaged and become sclerosed, leading to a loss of filtration capacity and an inexorable decline in kidney function until end-stage kidney disease develops. Moving to slide 8. Biomarker data from the phase 2b NEFIGAN clinical trial was used to obtain new learnings on the pathophysiology of IgA nephropathy. Specifically, dose-related decreases in galactose-deficient IgA1, immune complexes, and B-cell activating factor, or BAFF, a cytokine that plays an important role in the proliferation and differentiation of B cells, were observed in association with TARPEYO at the end of the treatment period in this study, demonstrating a clear effect on these important circulating pathogenic biomarkers which are associated with IgAN. Moving to slide 9, this provides an overview of the NefIgArd phase 3 clinical trial, also called NEF301, which had 2 parts. Part A, which is the basis for accelerated approval, and Part B, which is the post-approval follow-up to confirm the long-term renal benefit of the observed improvement in proteinuria. A total of 200 patients were required for the Part A analysis, which read out in November 2020, and a total of 360 patients are required for the Part B analysis, which includes the 200 patients already enrolled for the Part A analysis. Part B was fully enrolled in January 2021 and will read out in early 2023. To describe the design in more detail, patients with IgA nephropathy on optimized stable RAS blockade were enrolled and randomized to receive TARPEYO, also described as Nefecon, 16 milligrams once daily, or placebo for 9 months. The primary endpoint for Part A, reduction in proteinuria measured by change in UPCR, was assessed following 9 months of treatment. Treatment was discontinued and patients were observed for 3 months before entering Part B, comprising a further 12 months of observation without treatment. Primary endpoint for Part B is eGFR measured over the entire 2-year period of Parts A and B. Moving to slide 10, the baseline characteristics of the trial reflected the intended target population with a mean age of 44 years, 67.8% were male and 85.9% were white. Baseline mean blood pressure of 126/79 millimeters of mercury reflected the careful management of blood pressure control prior to enrollment. Baseline mean UPCR of 1.6 grams per gram and mean eGFR of 58 mils per minute reflected eligibility requirements of the study. Moving to slide 11, with respect to the primary efficacy outcome in Part A of the Phase 3 study, at 9 months there was a 34% reduction in UPCR in patients receiving Tarpeyo 16 milligrams versus a 5% reduction in patients receiving placebo. With respect to safety, the majority of adverse reactions were mild or moderate in severity, and the most frequently reported adverse reactions, and by this we mean reported at a frequency of 5% or higher in Tarpeyo-treated patients and with at least a 2% higher rate than placebo, were hypertension, peripheral edema, muscle spasms, acne, dermatitis, increase in weight, dyspnea, fatigue, and hirsutism. The frequency of these adverse reactions are presented in the following slide, slide 12. Overall, the pattern and frequency of adverse reactions are in keeping with what we expect for budesonide, are broadly aligned with what was seen in the preceding Phase 2b study, and we believe that these types of events are manageable in this patient setting. On the next slide, slides 13 and 14, we provide an overview of the indication and important safety information for Tarpeyo. Tarpeyo's full prescribing information is now available at tarpeyohcp.com. I'll now hand over to Andy Udell.
Thanks, Richard. I'm Andy Udell, President of North America. I joined Calliditas a few years ago while we were still recruiting for our Phase 3 clinical trial. And now I am truly excited to officially say the Calliditas USA commercial team is ready to launch the first and only FDA-approved treatment that was specifically designed to address many of the treatment challenges for IgA nephropathy. We believe we have a wonderful product, an experienced and outstanding commercial team, and the right strategy in place to successfully launch Tarpeyo early in the first quarter of 2022. Slide 16, please. As Renee stated earlier, IgA nephropathy has an estimated prevalence between 130 and 150,000 in the U.S. Over time, more than 50% of the patients progress to end-stage renal disease, which leads to dialysis and kidney transplantation, both of which are debilitating and extremely costly, with dialysis costing commercial payers in the range of $200,000 per year and kidney transplant over $440,000. Next slide, please. Research has consistently shown that this is an unsatisfied market that is craving advancement and a treatment specifically designed for IgA nephropathy. In a recent survey, 46% of the 188 nephrologists surveyed rated IgA nephropathy as extremely challenging to manage in non-dialysis patients. 52% of them believe there are currently few or no effective treatment options. They anticipated 65% of their patients will progress to dialysis, and 80% believe early intervention is critical to successful outcomes. Next slide, slide 18, please. So what kind of familiarity exists for our product? The top half of the slide looks at the most recent survey of 100 nephrologists conducted a few months ago by Spherix Global Insights. When we look at unaided awareness, we see our product has more than 4 times the awareness than any other agent in development. Of those with moderate or greater familiarity with our product, 92% rated the product highly positive in likelihood for success in IgA nephropathy. And in addition, in the same survey, our product is the highest rated product as the first, most desired when compared to all products in development. Going back to the larger survey of 188 nephrologists, the nephrologists that rated themselves as familiar with our product also rated themselves extremely likely to prescribe a product with our clinical profile for 70% of their current IgA nephropathy patients. Slide 19, please. As stated earlier, we are ready to commercialize. The last 3 months have provided our team more time to fine-tune our launch preparations. We have an extremely experienced leadership team in place with the average tenure of almost 20 years. Our functional leaders have held management and leadership roles at both large pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Merck, Sanofi, Bayer, BMS, as well as several smaller biotech companies. In addition, we have partnered with some of the leading industry agents and vendors over the last few years to assist in securing an efficient yet optimal launch strategy. Sales territories were filled with contingent offers that became effective upon approval, FDA approval. Our trade, distribution, and patient support services are all operational. Our launch campaigns have been developed and tested both for in-person and remote interactions. And over the last several years, we've worked closely with an eager, enthusiastic, focused, and receptive nephrology and IgA nephropathy advocacy community. We are ready, and we're very excited. Next slide, please. Our medical affairs team has been at it for a few years now. Our MSL team has established relationships. We are well published and active at relevant congresses, and we have worked closely with our advisory boards on how to best address and educate our audience. Next slide. Market access is vital, and we've done extensive work in this area over the last few years. It began with the establishment of the optimal trade and distribution path, which led to partner selection. After an extensive process, we have selected two of the industry best, an ICS from AmerisourceBergen and our exclusive specialty pharmacy Biologics, a McKesson company. Our national account managers have been in the field over the last few months holding and arranging meetings with payers in order to educate them on IgA nephropathy, and this will be the first time a company has approached them to treat this rare disease. The wholesale acquisition cost of Tarpeo will be $14,160 for a 30-day supply. We have priced Tarpeo according to the value it offers patients and toward reducing IgAN disease burden on society. Value was assessed according to clinical, economical, and societal benefits, factoring both established and innovative treatments that are currently available. We believe health insurance will provide broad coverage of Tarpeo, and Calliditas is committed to help ensure all appropriate patients will have access. To that end, we've developed a robust patient support program that offers services, assistance, and resources for patients, all designed to minimize the time between when a prescription is written and when a patient begins to take the medication. Next slide, please. Our full-service patient and provider support program is called Tarpeo Touchpoint. As mentioned, it's designed to streamline access of Tarpeo for the appropriate patients. The program uses Biologics' Pharmacy Elite model, which has a hub and exclusive specialty pharmacy services all under one roof. We have a dedicated team of care navigators, as well as designated rare pod team that contains nurses, pharmacists, and fulfillment and distribution team. In addition, our Calliditas director that's managing this group has launched, led, and managed several rare and specialty programs over her career. Next slide, please, slide 23. Moving on to our field force. Our head of sales joined us early in the year and has brought on tenured sales management team. They have spent the last several months recruiting territory representatives based on rare disease, specialty product, and nephrology sales experience. This was extremely important to us as we anticipate both in-person and remote interactions with our target audience. We believe we have a sophisticated segmentation, targeting, and customer relationship management system in place to provide the tools necessary to hit the ground running. Our onboarding and training timelines are realistic, and we're confident we will begin face-to-face promotion early during the first quarter. Before I pass it over to Frederick, I want to conclude by thanking our outstanding team at Calliditas. While some of us have been on this mission for a few years and some for only a few months, we are all dedicated and remain laser focused on what is most important, which is preparing to bring Tarpeo to the deserving IgA nephropathy community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Frederick.
Thank you, Andy. So let's turn to the financial slide. Next slide. I just want to start to remind you that at September 30 this year, we had a healthy cash position of 1,163.8 million SEK. And as you may recall, in July this year, we signed a $75 million credit facility with Kreos Capital. The first tranche, $25 million, was rolled down in the third quarter this year. And the second and third tranche together, $50 million remains of the facility to be used in 2022. Out of these 50, with yesterday's excellent approval, the second tranche of $25 million has been made available for us to draw down. And the third and last tranche of $25 million can be drawn down until the end of next year, subject to certain revenue milestones and coverage metrics. In addition, please keep in mind we also have a source of potential income and milestones from our collaborations with Everest in Greater China region and with STADA in the EU. And based on the current operational plan, we expect the current cash position and amount available under our loan facility. We believe we have sufficient funds for planned operations and capital expenditures until we become cash flow positive, which is currently projected for the first half of 2023, subject to Tarpeo being successfully commercialized in the US. Now back to you.
Thank you very much. Just some brief closing remarks before we open this up to questions. As you've heard, obviously we are delighted that the strength of our interim data package supported the FDA's decision to grant us an accelerated approval, enabling us to address the patient population with a clear unmet medical need. We believe that Tarpeo's differentiated approach in targeting the disease has the potential to have a significant impact on the progression of this orphan disease among patients at risk. And we are immensely proud of being pioneers in this indication and today successfully reaching the point where years of development and dedicated pursuit of a treatment finally can reach patients who today have no approved option to address this devastating disease. This is truly a fantastic day for patients in the entire IgA nephropathy community. Thank you very much for listening, and we will now take questions.
Thank you. If you wish to ask a question, please dial 01 on your telephone keypads now to enter the queue. If you find your question is answered before it's your turn to speak, you can cancel by dialing 02 on your telephone keypad. And our first question comes from the line of Maury Raycroft at Jefferies. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning, and much congrats on the update. Starting off, I was wondering if you can talk more about your pricing strategy. Do you have estimates for how net pricing could look, and how should we be thinking about duration on treatment?
Sure. Why don't you take the pricing-related questions, et cetera, Andy?
So I think we feel strongly that we're going to get broad uptake and coverage for our patients. And I think we feel that we've done our work here and that this is going to offer the appropriate benefits of the product and the value based on this price is how that was determined. We think that uptake is going to be strong. And we really, the other part of your question, I guess, was how you should think about a net price. I think we're, I think we're very lean and operational here, and I think it's a typical product that you would assume for this category, how you do look at net pricing.
Yeah, and I can feel you on the end that we expect sort of the gross to net to be in the ballpark of 15 to 20%.
15 to 20%. Got it. Very helpful. And also, the label seems generally broad. I'm wondering if you can talk about messaging strategy based on the label. It also comments generally 1.5 gram per gram on proteinuria. And so will that wording impact prescribing and ultimately the opportunity?
Sure. So I think that Andy will take the details on this. I think that obviously with regards to the label, as you said, I think that it's generally really going to be driven obviously by the physician's assessment of patients kind of at a risk of kind of more progressive disease. And I think that this is obviously, as we've said, also kind of consistent with the FDA's approach in terms of accelerated approval. But Andy, with regards to messaging, et cetera, why don't you cover that?
No, I think that our label, as you said, really points towards the patients at risk and provides a range for the prescriber to make that decision as it's indicated there. The other thing you had asked earlier about duration, you should look at duration. I think what's been pretty consistent for us is while the initial course, we certainly are recommending 9 months. Physicians have told us in research that how they're going to use this product, which is, it's going to be based on a patient-by-patient basis, and they'll have to determine that after that 9 months to see if the patient's getting increased benefits, as well as the tolerating the medication, things of that nature will determine whether they continue or whether they stop and then start again based on seeing these patients as frequently as they do.
And I think finally, just to add to that, obviously, what we have always assumed is, if we were to get an approval in this indication, that we would always expect physicians to obviously start with patients who are at risk, who really kind of, the most kind of, those patients most at need. And so I think, again, this is very consistent with what we would have expected, irrespective actually of the kind of, pointing to higher proteinuria patients. That is actually where we would have expected this to be used anyway in its initial, 12 to 24 months, simply because that is the most obvious, obviously, patient group into which to launch this drug.
Got it. It's really helpful. Maybe one follow-up. Do you have an estimate on what proportion of patients would stay on treatment beyond 9 months?
No, I don't think that is something that we can have a view on at this point in time. I think it's a bit early. I think we'll have to wait and see a little bit in terms of kind of, prescriber behavior on that before we can have a view on that.
Got it. Okay. Congrats again, and thanks for taking my questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Annabelle Samimi at Stifel. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning. And just want to let my congratulations myself. So I guess following up on a couple of those same questions, maybe you can quantify for us, do you have a sense of the population who is most at risk of progressive disease, or maybe if you can just get, specific about it, like, do you have a sense of the percentage of patients who have greater than 1.5 UPCR, just so we can frame who might be most appropriate for this medicine?
So I guess I'll start, and then Andy, you can add to this. I mean, I think that, first of all, obviously, it's important to kind of, clarify that obviously this is not a cutoff. So this is generally in that kind of range. So this is for patients with higher level and also obviously at risk of more rapid disease progression. And so I think that makes the quantification of this, quite difficult, because I think it will be physician assessment that is going to drive this for, prescribing, the prescription of this drug. I think the only thing that, we can kind of point to in this case is, as you know, unfortunately, there isn't massive amount of independent data, exactly describing this patient population. But obviously, as you can see in the label, and as Richard has covered, the mean UPCR in our trial was 1.6. And again, coming back to the fact that this is obviously more of an indication in terms of generally 1.5, I think it really will come down to, the assessment of physicians as to patients who are at risk of a more, rapid progression.
Okay, got it. And then maybe you can talk about I guess we're finally seeing the AE profile in detail now. And as you've stated in the past, it does have similar side effect profile to other steroids, but maybe you can help us understand, I guess it happens less frequent apparently with Tarpeo. So maybe you can help us understand the extent to which the AEs are tempered with Tarpeo versus other systemic steroids.
Yeah, so again, obviously, this is, as I'm sure you're aware, obviously the systemic availability of budesonide is quite different from systemic steroids. But Richard, why don't you?
I think you've seen the slide describing the more common adverse reactions. I think as we said before, there are no surprises here. This is absolutely in line with what we'd expect to see with budesonide, broadly in line with what we saw in phase 2B program. Typically characterized by generally mild or moderate in intensity, the majority, and in line with that kind of systemic, cosmetic kinds of effects of systemic corticosteroids, and certainly quite different to high-dose systemic corticosteroids, where you see that pattern of serious infections and bone effects, etc.
Yeah, and I think also, as we pointed out, obviously, these are, as Richard has said, it's mainly mild and moderate, and so obviously there are no kind of clinically relevant impact really on the metabolic or the cardiovascular system, which again is generally not the case with kind of systemically dosed steroids. The difficulty here is obviously also that we have very, very poor actual data on what the safety profile is of systemic steroids, because that never seems to actually be provided in any greater detail. But I think it's clear that this is a very manageable side effect profile. Particularly, these are obviously patients who are progressing towards dialysis and transplantation. So again, I think very, very manageable from that perspective.
Okay, and if I could just ask one more follow-up question again regarding pricing. So at 9 months, this is about $127,000 drug, and I guess you're going to have a gross net, which is great. But I mean, you talked about 55 to 85 range before, with possibility of being higher. I guess 55 to 85 was what payers were receptive to, and I guess how will those conversations proceed at this level? I guess, and what makes you comfortable that that's the right pricing strategy? Thanks.
Sure. So we guided the 55 to 85,000 that was in 2019, and based on a phase 2B profile. What we've seen over the last couple of years is the value and the perception, and as the product became real, unaided the anticipation and the value that they saw due to this high price of dialysis and transplantation seemed to grow as far as the anticipated and expected price based on this value. So that's, we've done a lot of research. We feel insurance will provide broad coverage. The cost of patients, will be dependent on insurances, but we want to make sure we've developed this robust program to offer these services and assistance, and we want to make sure that all patients will certainly have access.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Edwin Zhang of H.C. Wainwright. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. Congrats on the Tarpeo approval, really a remarkable journey and achievement. My first question, also on the real-world utility based on the label, will doctors prescribe Tarpeo to patients as long as their UPCR is over 1.5? We know Tarpeo is now the only approved drug, but we also know that RAS inhibitors are widely used off-label. So in the clinical trial, I think the patients are also on stable and max dose of RAS inhibitor. So please help us understand the dynamics here.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that, and then Andy, maybe you can follow up. So again, I think that obviously the 1.5 grams was a pre-specified subgroup, and this obviously is it's an easy kind of group to indicate as a example of these patients who have higher levels of proteinuria. And again, to be clear, I think that, these are patients that we believe that physicians will prescribe the drug to patients who are at risk of having a more rapid disease progression. And we know that that is correlated with higher levels of proteinuria. However, the label obviously does not provide for a specific cutoff, but generally an indication of the fact that, these patients should have higher levels of proteinuria. So again, I think this is going to be a physician assessment that's going to be driving this. Andy, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that that's exactly right. The way the label reads and the assessment of these patients, it's going to be on a patient-by-patient basis. I think that it's just basically their definition of what is at risk, and they start looking at how that's defined as they look at the UPCR as being one of the measures.
Okay. My next question, what do we expect to see in the next several months or quarters? What's your strategic focus to quickly penetrate and build up the market? Also, what are the feedbacks from your interactions with the commercial players, especially for the formulary positioning? Thank you.
Andy, do you want to take that?
So we always anticipate when launching a product, obviously, the first patients and the initial uptake is going to be with patients that are more severe, let's just say. So we do believe that will be the initial uptake over the beginning. We plan to be in the field very early in the first quarter, and that uptake will begin right after that. As far as our interactions with payers, once again, we're trying to, the goal in our work is to have access for patients, right, and not have that to be a barrier. And we feel that they will manage it appropriately based on the value that the product brings, and for the right appropriate patients. So we feel comfortable we're going to get some good broad coverage. And once again, we're going to make sure the patients have access to the product.
And here, obviously, the goal here is obviously to provide a drug and a medication that, has the potential to delay, onset of dialysis and or transplantation. And that obviously does hold a very significant value for the payer community.
Thanks. Congrats again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Yigal Nochomovitz of Citigroup. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Renee, and congrats on the approval. I had two questions. Yeah. Can you just clarify the agreement with the FDA on Part B for the eGFR? I mean, do you just need to hit the primary endpoint of that Part B to get the full approval, or is there some minimum delta on eGFR that you also need to achieve? And then I also was just curious, why did the name of the drug change? What was the problem with Nefecon? Why couldn't it stay Nefecon?
I wish it could have stayed Nefecon, first of all. That would have been great. I would have preferred that strongly, but actually this is obviously the regulators. It's an incredibly complex process to actually get a name approved, believe it or not. And it has to have, be unique in a lot of different aspects and not be able to be confused with a variety of things. So unfortunately, Nefecon didn't qualify as an acceptable name by the regulators. We're very happy with the name that we have, but obviously you're right. It would have been great if we could have continued to use Nefecon. So with regards to the Part B, obviously, I mean, that is something that we have an agreement with the design and the outcome of that trial with the FDA since, the beginning of starting this trial. And, we're committed to kind of, continuing it and completing it as agreed. I mean, there's really been no kind of changes to that trial design.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And our next question comes from the line of Rami Kafkuda of Lifestyle Capital. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Morning, everyone. Wanted to pass along my congratulations to the entire team as well. Just a quick one for me, but can you provide more details into Tarpeyo touchpoints and specific tactics on how that'll be used to help patients access treatment more easily?
Sure. So Tarpeyo Touchpoints is a full-service patient and provider program. So it's a hub. It's physically going to be located and integrated with our specialty pharmacy under one roof. We have dedicated teams dedicated for our product and our program. So what's typical, what's standard in a program like this is when patient gets a prescription from their physician and they get into the program, they register into the program. They will have a case manager and someone that will work with them to get them through the benefits verification process, kind of like white glove service to make sure that they have everything, that they're prepared, and they will send medication, and they will keep common touch points with the patient in order to make sure the patient is tolerating the medication, if the patient has any questions about dosing, things of that nature, so they can walk through with the patient through this entire process.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Ingrid Gafano of Kempen. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and one more congratulations to the entire team. I have a couple of questions, if I may. I don't know if you have disclosed that, but who is actually going to be manufacturing Tarpeyo for you, and where is that manufacturing going to be based geographically?
Yes, no, we have not disclosed it, but it is it's a U.S.-based, very large manufacturer who we have been working with for many years, who will be manufacturing the product for us.
All right, and I was just wondering, does this approval actually trigger any milestone payment from STADA or from Everest? Was there anything attached to this to this U.S. approval specifically?
Yes, we will have a milestone payment based on this approval, and the amount of that will show up in our Q4 report.
All right, and if I may, one last question for Andrew. Can you comment a little bit, just highlight to us how is the reimbursement landscape for IgA nephropathy patients, and in general, what kind of insurances are these patients covered by in the U.S.?
Sure. So I'll start with the last part as far as this is generally a commercial population. Between 63 and 75% have commercial insurance. And as far as the landscape today, there's really no management. It doesn't exist, right? There's nothing that's indicated for IgA nephropathy in this space. So there's really no management today.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have time for one further question that comes from the line of Erik Hultgård of Carnegie. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you so much, and congrats on the approval. I guess most of my questions have been answered already, but I have one question on the side effect profile and specifically the hypertension that was seen in the phase 3 study. I was wondering what was the definition of hypertension according to the phase 3 protocol, and how does this number 16% incidence, how does that compare with systemic steroids? And maybe second to that, maybe if you could comment a little bit on sort of the trends of hypertension in the patient. Was it transient or did you see a continued trend upwards in hypertension for these patients? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So I think, as you maybe know from previous, the requirements for entry into the study were that patients required good levels of blood pressure control and were excluded if the blood pressure was greater than 140/90. Now, there's actually no specific definition for hypertension when an investigator reports it as an adverse event. So, I think in a way, adverse events are a cruder way of measuring blood pressure versus actually the objective measurements of blood pressure during the clinical trial. And we certainly did very careful blood pressure monitoring during the trial. We have that kind of objective measurements, and that is the basis for our statements that we've made that we do not see any adverse clinical effects relating to the cardiovascular and metabolic systems. And I think broadly, as we've said already, I think the pattern of adverse events, including hypertension, for what we'd expect to see for budesonide with low levels of systemic exposure, and it's a pattern that's quite different from what we see with higher dose systemically available corticosteroids such as prednisone.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. And we actually have time for one further question. That's from the line of Chris Healy at SEB. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi there. Thank you very much for taking my question. I guess, so since it's only one, I guess I need to focus on the label, because I'm just trying to square how the FDA was maybe thinking with what we know from the KDIGO guidelines and elsewhere, because if I'm not mistaken, the guidelines from KDIGO say that the threshold for high risk of progression is over 0.75 grams per day despite supportive care, which I guess would appear to be about half of what the generally 1.5 on the label is. And it's also interesting to me because the guideline also suggests that systemic steroids are greater than 1 day. Yep.
Is there a question here?
Yeah, so as I said when I started, I was wondering if you could kind of try to give us some insight into how the FDA was thinking about this. Are they, is this actually a broad label as it's been said on this call, or is this trying to be keeping things narrow during at least the long-term follow-up study period?
So I think that this is a label, obviously, that gives a fair amount of, it hands really this over to the practicing physician, right? I think the practicing physicians are kind of in the position and used to really assessing their patients as to, are these patients at risk of a more rapid disease progression? I think what you can see is obviously it's been very well established that, patients with a low level of proteinuria do not necessarily progress particularly rapidly. It can take a long, long time for those patients to progress. Whilst we also know that higher levels of proteinuria do kind of correlate with a much more rapid disease progression. And therefore, obviously, this is a higher level of unmet medical need. And so again, I think this is an appropriate label for an accelerated approval. I think it's consistent with what the FDA wants to try and achieve with an accelerated approval. And I think that it's a label that I would say really kind of, again, it hands over the judgment here really to highly qualified nephrologists who are used to treating these type of patients. And so I think we are delighted with this label. And I think that, we would not refer to this as a narrow label. We would actually say that this is in line with what we would actually have expected physicians to, those type of patients that they would have chosen to treat most likely in the beginning of a launch of the very first product approved into this indication. And so I think, it is, and I think it is very consistent with, the FDA's approach and purpose of the accelerated pathway.
Thank you.
So with that, I think we are. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just to say we've come to the end of our time for questions, so I'll hand back to you for the closing comments.
Great. No, I just really want to thank you all. Thank you for participating in this webcast. And we are delighted for patients. We're now going to start really turning our focus to commercializing this and getting this out into the market and into the hands of deserving patients with IgA nephropathy. So thank you very much for participating.